so much of what you all do is really amplifying and showing other women and other Black women and other women from the continent with roots from the continent that this can be done and that this is a thing that's worth doing. But I do wonder, what does it take for a Black woman director or person in this industry to make it in cinema, in the arts? And what about Hollywood? Is that different? Is making it in Hollywood different than making it on the continent? And are there different challenges? Idil, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, it's funny that you asked that. I've been thinking about this a lot, and drive takes a lot of drive. It's not easy, and sometimes, you know, within this industry, it can be an uphill battle. So you do have to have that love of the arts, but also tenacity to really push forward. Um, and a commitment to your creative vision, right? So in addition to learning, being practiced in the discipline, it's important to be clear about the type of work that you want to create, creating with integrity and being clear, because there will be many people in the industry really having their own vision and trying to sometimes place that on you. Um, Personally, I've just stuck to my guns and have started with internships, and then through that, lower level roles on productions, and then increasingly just a diehard commitment to making the work. And now I'm arriving at a place where I've one foothold, as I said, in the States, and am slowly liaising with Hollywood more and more, but also being clear about the type of work I want to create. And in terms of it being different, what's encouraging right now is there's a lot of bridges being built, right? So in some ways, Hollywood is really looking outwards and opening the aperture, because there's so much talent and incredible work coming from other parts of the world, Africa and elsewhere. And it's very myopic to think that this is, the root of everything, when in reality, creative inspiration source is in many places. And I think that right now there's so much talent and creation and films and television coming out of the continent, that they not only Hollywood but other industries have to pay attention, because it's, as Areej and Azza said, something that needs to be tuned into, because that's where it's all at, and Beyonce is a perfect example of that. Azza, thank you, because that was a film music, extravaganza, if you will, largely rooted in the traditions of African culture, and prior to this call, I was just thinking of other filmmakers. I was like, other African women filmmakers, and it's like a long list, and they're there and elsewhere in the diaspora, and I'm so excited to see the films that they produce over time.
We're going to talk about in a minute one who is making a lot of headlines recently, not for good reasons, unfortunately, which then pushes back against, this narrative that people need to watch films before they actually critique them and critique the people behind them. But hold tight to that thought. You had mentioned internships and your path to get to where you are today. And, in hindsight, it's easy to just kind of brush past it and say, yeah, it took a lot, but here I am. But I actually want to dig right in, because I know it had to be really difficult. So internships to bigger projects, what exactly was going on in your personal life? Did you have people who were supporting you and saying, yeah, this is what you should do? Or were they saying, no, you should get a real job? And then once you're on those sets, when you're on a film, does everyone know that you're the director? Or are they like, where is the director? I do not see the white man that I believe should be directing this film.
Lord, I'll censor myself on this thing. I'll answer your question backwards. So yes, when I'm on set, and I'm oftentimes the only Black woman on set surrounded by men, absolutely. If I'm in a producerial capacity, other people will ask where the producer is, and I have to say I'm the producer. And similarly, if I'm directing, that's been less of an issue, because I've kind of developed the teams. And as a producer, you try your best, but there's, it's a democracy, and you can't always push and shape teams as you'd like. And you know, there are a lot of microaggressions that you face. Luckily, I'm the descendant of strong Somali women who don't take shit, and I've inherited that. And I think that I have to really embody that when I'm on these productions, especially in very masculine, patriarchal sets. And you just kind of nod, take a deep breath, and then you push forward. So it's not always easy, and can be very stressful, but I just choose my battles. And if I'm in a leadership role, I make it clear that I'm in that role, and I have to be, I have to engage and have real inclusion. But in terms of internships, I got really lucky. Early on, I had an incredible mentor named Laurietta Taub. She's based in LA. And I was on a set with her for about 3.5 months, which through that experience was in every aspect of production. And Laurie made it clear for me that I needed to understand each department in order to make the show. And she was so inviting, and in terms of teaching me everything about production, that the way she liaised with me has stayed with me to this day. And it's how I work with my interns and other people that I'm working with on my sets as well. And throughout time, initially I had the passion for the work, but you just explain to your family, like, this is what I'm doing. They'd love initially for me to be maybe a computer scientist or an engineer. It wasn't hard to communicate that I was making films, but eventually when they started to see the work come to fruition, they understood, and they're very supportive. So I've had a lot of support along the way, whether that's through mentorships, but also through my family.
Yeah. Areej and Azza, same question, the two-prong, like, do family members, I mean, I know your family, Areej, and you're all in the arts, so there's an allowance for that, but are there people in your circles who do think you should get a real job? And then also, you're creating this company. Are there people who dismiss you and want to know where the real power is?
You don't hold back, Malika. I mean, look, I'll say this. The shift that I made years ago from being a news producer and before that a policy analyst to this person today has not been easy. Yes, there are family members, extended family, even family members closer than that I think a few years ago really didn't get it and didn't understand the path forward, because I think fundamentally this is the case with a lot of first generation kids, right? We grew up in the States, our parents didn't, you know, they have certain ideas about what it is you're supposed to do, especially for millennials. I don't know how it is with these Gen Z people, but for us, you know, they have certain ideas about what you're gonna do. So computer scientist, lawyer, you know, things that are a little bit more clear in terms of a trajectory. So I did have a lot of doubt surrounding me. No, it was not helpful, but you know, it teaches you how to have thick skin in this industry. You have to have thick skin. It's just not for the faint of heart. And I would say that in the end, it all sort of works out. It really does. If you have a vision and if you're steadfast. What was the second part of your question? Oh, people that, yes. So it's interesting, you know, I maybe shouldn't be saying this, but a lot of even the players on the continent in terms of the producers to know who actually make things happen. And this has been sort of a crash course that Statement Films has been on for a few months in terms of who makes things happen, who has kind of the data that you need to even design a company like this for that market. You know, there's a lot of gatekeeping going on, and a lot of the people who are doing the gatekeeping are not, you know, Black Africans. They might be white Africans, they might be white male white Africans, you know, and it's the kind of thing where you see that although there's a lot of lip service given to wanting to share and be really open, and all this new attention on the continent, specifically from the streamers, which is why people care so much right now, because the streamers are all moving in and they're moving in fast. They say that they want it to be a really open thing, and then the practice, the follow through isn't there. There's a ton of gatekeeping going on, and people want to know, you know, who you are, why you're interested in doing this, where your money's coming from, various kind of strange things off the bat that actually remind me a lot of what's not cute about Hollywood and how those people talk. So in that sense, it's very similar. And I think when you're a Black woman, you kind of are used to this by this point in your life, like in your mid-30s, it's just like business as usual. But I think that there's a particular disappointment when it's coming from people from the continent that you are originally from. And I know that Azza, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this too, Malika. I'm sure you were about to ask her, but we talk about this all the time. Azza is the person that I have these debriefs with, and I'm just like, how and why is this still the case? You know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, the reason why a lot of the statistics that you have out there in terms of Black women or Black African women or women of color, that they are not present in the media and film for many years, and the numbers are decreasing now, is just because of what you just said about, you know, families accepting them to go into these, actually as well, very male-dominated spaces and very macho, right? So if you come from a conservative family, you wouldn't want your daughter to go out there, one. And number two, it takes a lot of years for you to make it. You know, it's not easy. People think it's just, you know, it's being creative and it's fun. No, it's really tough work, right? And I think it's finally being recognized, you know, in our generation, because you've seen a lot of really amazing films and filmmakers who've won awards, you know, who've won Oscars, who won, and as well are recognized. You know, look at Michaela Cole, who was a writer, producer, director, and she's from Ghanaian origin, and she just come in and just knocked everybody out, you know, with the work that she's creating. And she's an amazing content creator. And I think people are finally, and parents and are respecting that. They're just like, well, you know, there's a huge gap there. And I think in terms of statistics, the numbers are actually rising. And I think me and Areej really feel like we want to continue to have these numbers rise much more, because we definitely have the talent. And then, and as well, speaking of gatekeepers, we have so many gatekeepers. We have, you know, producers who are gatekeepers, financiers who are gatekeepers. And speaking of financiers, a lot of it actually in Africa, we're always used to aid. You know, they're like, oh, how much do you want to make a film to develop it? Oh, here, we'll give you $100,000. We're like, no, you invest in us, right? To grow, right? So it's not a charity. You know, we're not going there to just play, and then for you to have a command in terms of what are we gonna shoot and what are we gonna show or not, right? So it's actually kind of rewiring people's minds in terms of like, you know, African content is actually, it's a business. Right? It's not you giving a camera to a bunch of like 50 kids and go out there in the village and be like, go take some nice photos and show me your perspective, you know? No, you know, those days are over. You know, that was nice in the 80s, the 90s, it's fantastic. But I think now we're more into like, you know, we're developing and we're supporting women and supporting content that actually is gonna go long-term, because the business is gonna go long-term. You know, you look at it just like a factory. You look at it just like a hospital. You look at it like any legitimate service that you are providing, and it's not donations anymore. It's more like, you know, proper investment. So piggybacking on what Areej was saying and talking about like these gatekeepers, you've had them. And I think a lot of the films that came out, especially in places like Mali and Senegal, especially French influences, have all been supported by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of France, right? And for years. And the thing is that they've provided great equipment, they've provided great, of course, cinematographers and all of that, but with a main African director. But when you look at their production and everybody who's there, they're mostly French, you know? And the thing is that I think we're much more interested in terms of, yes, of course, having cross collaboration with, you know, Western entities, that's fine. But I think we're thinking more of how can we create a model where a large part of the crew is people from the continent, not ideally just from the country, but being like, oh, how about having a Tanzanian cinematographer and having, you know, a Ghanaian producer, and being Pan-African in a lot of ways, and doing that as well in terms of like, how do you invest and develop these films? Is have to think about like, how can have African businesses and African companies and, you know, be invested in this long term.
So well, can I say one more thing about this question?
Yeah, of course.
I'm going to be really quick, but I think Azza said something that is so key that I really want everyone here to understand about films coming from this continent. it is very much that old foreign aid mentality. So most of these films, and we've done the research, our company has done enterprising research on the African film market and media market. We've spent months on it. So much of the financing for these movies is soft financing from ministries of foreign affairs in Europe. What has that resulted in? That has resulted in the last 40 years of African cinema intellectual property having European owners. Like, sit with that for a second. So in terms of ownership, it's not really there. And so now that there are big business and tech is moving in, and Netflix and Apple and Amazon and HBO, you know, Max International, et cetera, first of all, those companies are gonna have a field day because they're gonna own all the data in Africa, and they're gonna set the prices because there are no producers guilds or any other kinds of guilds to protect baseline fees for the producers or anything else like that. That's number one. We're already seeing that. But the fact that, you know, some of us, like Azza said, like, this isn't charity. We started a company. We intend on making money. We intend on Africans owning their films. This is very political for us. And, you know, there are people that don't want those things to change. They just don't, because, you know, when you are able to finance your movie, even just fundamentally speaking from soft financing, you're not really on the hook for the movie to have to perform, which then speaks to the quality of a lot of the stuff that's getting made, which is just not where it should be. So it's a cyclical problem. It's something that we're definitely trying to address in many ways with our strategy, but I wanted to highlight that because that is something that I really would love everyone to take away from this talk.
Yeah.